However, shall I introduce this week's guest? Harmony, I'm going to give it a shot. And I do this thing now where you can correct, the guest corrects and adds to parts of it. But I want to start with uh, some things I think people are going to be really interested in. Harmony lives in a tent that she built herself in the snow out by Yellowstone, where her neighbors are wolves that she feeds with roadkill. How am I doing so far?
Well, I'm not actually near Yellowstone anymore. I
Okay.
was for a while, but now I'm actually in Washington. But I spent a lot of time in Montana because I'm still a Montana resident. So I do go set up a tent there during the winter time, but I don't live there full time. But there are still wolves about 30 minutes down the road.
All right. All right. Cool. Well, yeah. So that I wanted to start with like, well, this is exciting. But yeah, Harmony is an artist and a teacher and a hunter and a I guess animal products specialist and even to some extent historian in the sense of like researching ancient and ancestral ways of treating animal products and hunting and so on. So I want to have a really good chat about that kind of stuff, about ancestral skills and animals and spirits and all that kind of cool stuff. But first, we have to begin with the traditional first question. Harmony, were you a weird kid?
I love this question. Yeah, I was. I asked my mom about it because I was really quiet, and everyone, like my auntie, said I was a creepy kid. I was very shy. I didn't like talking. I was the kind of kid that my little sister had to order at a restaurant because I couldn't speak out loud in front of adults I didn't know. And I remember finding this skull. It must have been like a rat or a rabbit skull. I lived in the suburbs of Denver, and I found this skull and I liked it so much I put it on a piece of dental floss and made a necklace out of it. This was probably third grade, you know. And my dad was a evangelical Christian, and so it really spooked him pretty hard. And I remember him taking it off and telling me that we weren't earth worshippers, which that stuck to me, you know. And I'm still like walking with my dad's dead now, so he's on the other side, and it's cool how much he can teach me from the other side. But so yeah, I think from his eyes, I was really weird. And I grew up in a big family of 9 brothers and sisters. And there are a couple of us, a couple of my sisters also had kind of strange tendencies. We all had kind of, you know, abilities in our dreams. Like one of my sisters had a lot of experiences with aliens. And so I grew up with her, like, she was absolutely certain aliens were coming into her window at night. And so, yeah, it was kind of
Yeah.
a shy, introverted, very solemn child, very serious child.
Do you, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why, like, do you have a memory or do your memories validate that idea that you were super quiet and had to have your sister order for you in restaurants? Like, do you think about, is that, she said that to you. Would you say that's valid? I mean, growing up with that many siblings, it's in fact kind of
Mhm.
normal to be like, oh my
Yeah.
God, oh, shut up, everyone, you know.
Yeah, I would. I think looking back now, I can kind of see how I really was interacting with other beings more than I was the humans, you know? And even in school, I remember, I mean, getting called in, you know, to read out loud in school, I would tear up and shake because I just couldn't bring myself to interact in that way. Which has changed, obviously, now that I'm an adult. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty outgoing and confident and articulate and all of that. But yeah,
Just
I
saying
was
that,
very
I mean, this
introverted.
is like a short, like a long story that we'll get a short answer out of, right? But that emerges as you kind of grew up and sort of found that actually I'm not shy. I just like other beings more than humans most of the time. Do you think that's part of the outgoingness? Like, how do you attribute that change from being a
Hmm.
kid who was too shy to like talk to someone who like facilitates and teaches groups?
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about it, but you're onto something there that really resonates. That once I started finding, well, I can't take credit for any of it. Once I was claimed and put on my path, and I was reckless to enough to say yes to it, then, I mean, I was just, yeah, naturally fed and nourished and built up in a way. And I can speak about things that I really love, you know, which is mostly about animals and ancestral skills and all of that. And I still find it hard at parties. I can't small talk, you know, I can't like just shoot the shit with people. Like I really have to go there and then I can really open up. But yeah, and often I feel like almost like a, well, not almost, it is, I'm channeling, right? Not all the time, but when I'm really on my good days and I'm really solid and grounded in myself and I can get the ego out of the fucking way, then yeah, I feel like I can open up to some bigger stuff.
Well, it's in fact an ancestral skill in and of itself. So there you go.
Yeah.
During the email exchange arranging this interview, you spoke about kind of like dabbling in magic, in like, speaking of that sort of wayward youth. So I guess take us from the story of the kid with the rat skull pendant into, bit of magic, bit of Discordianism, and so on.
Yeah. So I grew up kind of in North Denver, and after the whole rat skull thing, I really shamed myself out of my magical self for a while. I went through elementary school and high school, but then in high school I found punk rock, and punk rock changed, it saved my life really. And so I ended up dropping out of high school. I moved out really young, and I was like staying in or squat. It was called the orphanage. There was a squat house in downtown Denver I was staying at, and lived out of an abandoned bus, and was really like embodying or inhabiting the decay of the industrial city that I was raised up in. And found a lot of life and a lot of healing there, a lot of adventure, because when you grow up in the burbs in the city, you have to kind of seek that out in the slip space. So but yeah, kind of in my high school years in the punk rock scene, there were a lot of us starting to get into Aleister Crowley because of that kind of dark aesthetic. And then I started looking more into it more deeply. And I am pretty academic actually when it comes down to it. And so I like to read a lot and kept reading and got into Robert Anton Wilson and of course Terence McKenna and all those guys, and started kind of dabbling in the entheogen world a little bit, and that, of course, that cracked me open more and more. And then it just all became a big joke. Like my years and I traveled around a lot. I was hitchhiking and train hopping and homeless for a long time, and sleeping under bridges and in fields on the edges of cities and stuff. And it was hilarious to me that you can literally do anything you want. You can walk in this world, and it's so easy to follow spirit when you're not hemmed in by all of these other artificial like schedules and the clock and a job and the money. And so I found the what I call slip space, and I don't think I came up with that. That was probably one of my friends, but this way of moving where it was all hilarious how easy it actually was. And so with a little bit of bravery and maybe the skill of suffering thrown in there too, because you do suffer when you're living on the side of the road waiting for a train for 3 days in a blackberry bush, and there's like some homeless guy's poop next to you. And so
So how old were you
um,
then?
that was my late teenage years,
Yeah, cool.
18, 19, 20, 21. And, just kind of explored a lot in that realm. And Robert Anton Wilson's work really cracked it open, and like magic is real and it's really fun. And you can actually have a lot of fun with it. And so once I stopped traveling a little bit, I got a house in Olympia, Washington, and I started this big, it was a 6-bedroom old farmhouse painted black. And I started, as a joke, a Discordian temple, and I was like, oh, I'm going to summon all my roommates and see if they appear on the doorstep, which they did, of course. And so we kind of started this chaos church there. And until that imploded, because that happens when you only worship chaos and like imbue chaos and summon chaos. And yeah, it exploded. And things got kind of
You
rough. I
learn
was
that.
way over
Yeah.
my
Yeah,
head.
you learn that early on. So about when was this?
Yeah.
Because there's some stuff there that I kind of resonate with. There's a particular kind of like end of history, post-industrial aesthetic that
Yeah.
suited that late 90s really suited a Bob Wilson um, humorous approach to, because it wasn't so much that the world was meaningless, but we were still in that end of history moment. We were still like post-Soviet or post Berlin Wall and before the .com crash. There's this window where it
Mhm.
did kind of look like history was over, and it was this sort of odd slacker joke, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So well, I'm 34 now. I'm trying to think of what
Okay,
I'm
so
not
that would
that
have
good
been a
at
bit
what
later.
years are.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, a
All right.
little bit beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
But it
Well,
was
for
still
me, that
there,
was
and
what
I still
like
love
because
it.
I grew up in a post-industrial town as well, and my kind so
Hmm.
it's a few years before you, but it's my that same. There's something about that aesthetic, and I actually quite like post-industrial landscapes, right? And it's
Totally.
almost because there's like a um, it's like a Ozymandias poem, right? It's sort of like
Mm.
it's a monument to hubris. It's a monument to, like, I don't want to say effort and work, but confidence. But confidence, like, everything will be mechanized and efficient. It's like, how's that going? And
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then being able to make a living, to be alive and sustain myself off of the trash of the industrial waste, living out of dumpsters. And we used to play Presto Manifesto when we were traveling around without money, and I'd be like, I really am craving a latte right now, and walk around the corner, and on top of a trash can would be somebody's latte they put there.
yeah,
And it's just hilarious. Like, in the dumpsters, we'd pray to the dumpster gods, and oh, we'd really want some Chinese food tonight. And then that night, find Chinese food. And so, like, something really potent being able to come out of that decay, because there's life and there's magic everywhere, especially in the cities, and it wants to like bubble out of the cracks.
yeah, cool. So how do you? Let's
Mhm.
take us to the story of, because how do you get from that to, I think I'm going to learn how to not only shoot with a bow but make them. Like, how did you find yourself going down the path of ancestral skills?
Yeah. Well, it had to do with punk rock too. I became radicalized young, and just became literate in the Western Empire is kind of a disaster that's crumbling, and what do I do about it? And it was a question that could never, it never left. It was never like, oh, I can do this and this and this, and then I'll just continue living my life. It's the perennial question that keeps blooming. Not necessarily what can I do about it, but what do I do?
Yeah,
Just what do I do within all of this? And so um, I kept looking for life ways that more and more were less participatory in the systems that I didn't like, and the ways that people were operating that I didn't like. And so that's when I started the house in Olympia, the Discordian Temple. It really started, something was planted there. And I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I remember we had a rat problem, because in Washington the rats get really big. We had a rat problem, and it was eating all of our food. So I set this rat trap and killed this rat, and it was the first time that I had ever intentionally killed an animal directly. I know I've contributed to many hundreds of thousands, millions of animal deaths every day since I've been alive, but to kill an animal and see the consequence of that, and to be in relation with that animal, it just ripped me apart. And I thought, oh my, I don't even know how to be a human. Like, I don't even know what I owe this animal. Like, didn't people used to use every part, and now I've killed this animal and I don't even know what that means? And I was ashamed, actually. I held a lot of shame about that, but I ended up skinning it and cutting him into little pieces and frying him up and eating him, including his heart and his organs. And I had his skin. And I didn't really know much about anything at that point. I just heard from the different grapevines, like, well, you can maybe tan it using black tea. And so I put it in some black tea. And this scenario really propelled me into, like, how did humans do this for most of our existence on planet Earth, everywhere in the whole world? You would grow up just knowing what this means, what killing an
yeah,
animal means, and how to do these things. And how was I was a radical activist. I was like an anarchist punk and going to protests and stuff. And I realized I didn't know how to not participate in the system that I didn't like. Everything in my life was completely reliant on the empire and on the Western civilization that I despised and was really angry about. But I was sucking at the teat of it the whole time and had no other life way. And so I think it kept pushing me to figure out more and more, well, how can I actually reclaim little parts of my life and become fully responsible, or my community can be fully responsible for what we need to survive. And I'm still on that journey. I'm not a purist, and I still put gas in my chainsaw. I still participate. I don't want people to get the wrong idea, because at this point It makes sense, and I actually don't know if there is a way to not participate fully. But I'm
Agreed.
trying to push more and more and more, and maybe not even for. It's not even necessarily that I think I'm doing anything. It's more that it's for my own soul and my own consciousness.
I want to come back to that because that's a really good point, especially the participation, non-participation. But I can't let this slide without asking, what does rat taste like?
Oh, it's delicious. Oh,
Really?
it tastes like meat. I mean, a lot of these animals, everyone's like, "What is it?" And it's like a dark meat. Tastes like the oil you fried it in, you know. But you
Okay.
fry it whole. You eat all the bones and everything, including the skull. You can fry up everything in there, unless you really want to like, remove every little bit. But you can. They're like little chips. If you deep fry them, you can eat the whole thing.
So a big rat then, I guess, because I've had, in Peru I've had like cuy, so guinea pig,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
that was good. So I mean, it's a different animal, but like maybe not that different. I don't know.
Yeah, and it depends on what they're eating. And if I'm going to live in a city, I'm going to eat a city rat because they're eating the pollution of my life way. And so I don't know why a lot of people are like, I would never eat a city rat or a city raccoon. And it's like, but it's the consequence of your life way that this animal is eating, and you're responsible for that animal's well being. So you should actually be eating it. I think, I don't think I need to import my meat from somewhere that's more pure. Yeah.
So it's funny enough because that kind of gets back to participation, non-participation, and whether the one it is impossible, kind of like because we'll call it the empire or whatever exists. It's sort of not possible to opt out. It doesn't mean
Mhm.
acquiesce to it, but it does. You have the opportunity to be in a kind of relation with it that is soul led, like what you're saying,
Mhm.
right? Because and I actually think that's what brings it down. It's funny, I was having this conversation and it'll come up in a later show. uh Moving from anarchist to post anarchist, because anarchism kind of comes with this implied requirement to bring the system down. But if it's already
Mhm.
coming down, it's like, well, I'm off the hook for that. But it's
Mhm.
still sort of there, and how you don't necessarily opt out exactly. It's far more complicated and fraught. But even the idea that you can kind of separate yourself from the consequences of your actions is literally an imperial thought. It's literally like,
Yeah.
I will hide. So Australia, up until recently, would do things, and this is insane, right? But it would ship its garbage to the Philippines. So this enormous continent would ship its refuse to the Philippines, which we would pay for, which is a bunch of small islands by comparison. And it's like, but it's like,
Wow.
done. This is, I've separated my recycling, and the world is fine. And I'm like, it isn't. It's it's not.
Right.
And I think there's something. And fortunately, because of well, not fortunately, because he was a bit of a lunatic, but like the previous. Duterte, the previous head of the Philippines, was like, "No, fuck this. We're not doing that. Australia's a rich
Wow.
country with lots of space. Where we're not taking your garbage." And so, but we didn't even have the recycling facilities or anything left because we would just export it. And this is what I mean. Like, you can't escape believing you can escape the consequences is one of those thoughts that's imperial in the first place, right? So you kind of get caught
Mhm.
in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful, Gordon. Yeah, and I think that what's important to me at this point is bringing those consequences to my front door. And so that I can see the trees that I cut down for building my shed, the stump is right there, and still in direct relation with all those roots that are still alive. And the blood spot on the snow where I just had the roadkill deer, it's right we bringing them closer, it allows you to be in relation with everything, and then also be reminded of your agreements that you have with all those
Yeah.
beings and all the obligations and responsibilities you have to your what your life creates, which it is when you put it in the box and you send it away. I mean, you're still, I think your spirit still deals with the consequences, even if your direct like physical realm isn't existing. I think your spirit knows, even if your mental logic mind doesn't.
Yeah, agreed. And the cosmos definitely knows. The Sutahil Maya have this idea that essentially um, everything that we extract from the earth, which is everything from this living being, the mother, uh, has to be accounted for one way or the other, and that's through ceremony and beauty and so on. But if we neglect that
Mm,
bit, then we're fucked, which is where we are
Yeah,
now, right?
right.
And that's
Yeah.
because I'm like, there's this idea, sort of very Zen idea of bearing witness, which I
Mhm.
like, right? Which is, this isn't, I'm not solving it, I'm attending to it, because solving
Mhm.
it is again that imperial thinking, right? So
Yeah.
to bear witness, because we're here in this moment, and this is the sort of inescapability of the empire. We're here in this moment, and what are we called to do with it? And it's, at very least, it is to attend to it. Different people, it might be
Yeah.
more, but at very least, it's attending, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. There's this old story about Odin that I really like, where he comes up on a dying horse in a snowstorm, and the horse is mired down, and it's, well, whiteout blizzard, and the winds are howling, and the horse says, "Oh, Odin, I'm so happy you're here. You're the All Father, the most powerful of the gods. You have so much wisdom. Can you stop me from dying?" And Odin says, "Of course I can't. Even though I am the All Father, and I'm the one of the most powerful, wise of the gods, I don't have that power. But what I can do is this." And he sits down and he starts speaking beautifully about the horse's death.
That's lovely. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, and it's like what I was thinking of there. This is another Sutahil Maya thing, right? Is we talk about just quote unquote animals here, but this idea of the inescapability of obligation. Uh, if you take, because we grow a bunch of stuff, and it's summer, so we've got a whole bunch of frivolous tomatoes, right? Um,
Nice.
and if we take a tomato, I think about this every time I do it, off the plant, from a Tsutahil Maya perspective, you are robbing the tomato mother of her daughter. You are stealing her daughter away, there's all these stories around it, like marriage stories between plant spirits and humans to kind of get this idea in. But you think about it, this is a plant that is in the process of reproducing. So it's the offspring of this plant, and you're taking that away, right? That means there's an obligation there, and the cosmology has uh, a framework of understanding and paying for that, right? Because that's what we don't do. This is the obligation part. It's like I am robbing tomato mother of her daughter. So for vegans because we got a bunch of vegans, and that's all chill. I don't care. People should live their lives and be happy and healthy, right? But there's no like, oh well, I'll just eat plants and avoid the obligation. Is no, the whole this whole thing is alive, and the relationality isn't the same, but it's neither is the obligation, but they're still present. I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. That reminds me of a lot of things, right? The accounting for all of the sometimes I think of the life spirit force of everything, kind of like a blanket. And when you harvest something, whether it be a deer or a tomato, and you make a hole in the web of it, and
Yeah,
so you can write through beauty, through poetry, through ceremony. You can fill that hole, or that the hole will be fed whether you feed it or not. And I think that this causes a lot of unforeseen consequences. I mean, look around us in the Western world. Like,
exactly,
it
exactly.
seems like
So
things are sucked down
that's
into holes.
Yeah. Harmony, you would make an excellent upland Mayan, because that's basically exactly what the shamans do. Is their
Mhm.
form of divination is to work out where humans have essentially torn a hole in the fabric of time, and how to fix
Mhm.
it. And if you don't fix it, it gets fixed one way or the other, and that's the consequences
Right.
that happen around it, right? So there's
That's
no
right.
escaping the obligation. And we tried for coming up on 200 years, and here we are. Here
Yeah.
we all are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's get back to. So that was the beginning of the sort of intellectual journey of, or the like the inner journey is better, of like, okay, well, I'm not even owning my own consequences and obligations and relationality. So from there, it was that the decision to like, I need to learn how to do things like hunt and build the implements required for hunting. Was that the kind of thinking that went on from there?
Yeah, yeah. And I forgot to mention, before I killed the rat, I had found some roadkill. And that actually was like the very initial opening of, like, creaking open the door into what's possible. And seeing roadkill on the ground, uh, Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit just because it's tracking myself, I guess. So I was riding my bicycle, it was late at night, there was a roadkill squirrel on the ground, and as I was riding past, I could hear this roadkill squirrel, which I had never talked to animals or spirits or anything like that, I guess probably since I was a kid, but I hear the squirrel say, "If I was a human, would you just pass me?" And I stopped my bike and I thought, what? And I looked back and this poor squirrel is just smashed on the road. And I thought, whoa, first of all, yeah, would I pass a dead human on the road? Of course I wouldn't. And second of all, did that fucking squirrel just talk to me? And so I stopped. I couldn't even pick the squirrel up. I kid you not. I would go for it and then do that like thing, even though he's clearly dead. And so I ended up getting a plastic bag and kind of scooping him up, put him on the handlebars of my bicycle, and rode back and sat with him until I could actually touch him. I got back to my house and just sat with him on my porch until I could touch him. I thought, what is this? Why can't I can't even touch death? Like, but I'm consuming, I'm only alive because of death, but I can't even touch it. Why am I so afraid? And so I held him for so long until I could pick him up and look at him. And I just remember there was such immense beauty and perfection in this squirrel, And I remember thinking, like, I got like, there's something here. I'm missing something. Like, I'm supposed to contribute to this somehow, and I don't know how. And so I ended up burying that squirrel, and I started picking up roadkill and burying a lot of roadkill because it just felt better to put them in the soil rather than watch them rot on the pavement. And then watching thousands of people blast past without any recognition of some animal's death was really brutal too. And so picking up roadkill, I'd find more and more and more roadkill. So I was just inundated with all this roadkill all the time. And yeah, it did. I started piecing together little bits of like, okay, well, I can skin them and I can eat them, or I can bury them, or I can make earrings out of their paws, or whatever, little necklaces and stuff. But there's something more. It was like I didn't want it to just be for my punk rock aesthetic. I was like, what do I owe these animals, and how many animals are being killed every year on the roads? And so that's when I started wanting to be a hunter. And I thought, well, I don't, because I was vegan too, until I ate that rat. I was vegan. And so
Usually
I
people
thought, well,
break veganism by eating bacon. You ate rat.
yeah, it was better than bacon, I think. Oh my gosh, a little rat heart. So I started this. The mindset I came to was, okay, I owe the wild world, the more than human world, a lot. And I don't even know. I did not grow up in a culture being taught this stuff. My family are all city people. And so I was like, I'm going to court them slowly. And this was all my courtship. I was like, I got to romance these guys. I mean, it's like, yeah, like I felt this deep love for them, but didn't know anything about them, didn't know the plants and the animals, all of it. And so I thought, well, I mean, I'll start from the basics then. As a human being, picking up two rocks and hitting them together to make a cutting tool, that's where I started. And like, what does it mean to actually have a cutting tool from a rock that you picked up? And what do you owe the rock people now? Right. And like, what does it mean when you use that? And yeah, what do you owe that place where the rock was for the last however many hundreds of years or whatever? And starting so slow and thinking so hard about this. And that really kind of set me into monkhood, like this academic monk scholar of like really like learning how to flint knap, and then of course learning how to make arrows, and then
So, like,
learning how to
talk me through that
bow.
exactly, right? Like, so you said, okay, it was the experiential first, so breaking or making very crude tools out of rocks, and then realizing I need to like upskill intellectually on how this is done so I can get better at it. So it's like, did you hit the library? Did you like how does that? What do you do when it's like, okay, I need to know how to make tools out of flint, including arrowhead.
Mhm.
How do I do
Yeah.
that? Was it the library? Did you happen to know an arrow expert? Like what goes on there?
No, I didn't. Once I opened the door, I learned about these gatherings. There's yeah, I hesitate to call them primitive skills gatherings,
Yeah.
but that's what a lot of people know them as, ancestral skills gatherings. I just hesitate to use primitive because I think to a lot of Western people it connotes simple or like somehow lower than, and it's really not. These technologies are so sophisticated. Most people right now from a city can't pick up a stone and make a cutting edge. Like it's not as simple. It's not caveman. I don't know all the cartoon ideas of what
No, it's
primitive means.
not primitive, it's perfect. It is
Yeah,
exactly what is needed for the task, right? It's not
yeah,
superfluous. And that I know exactly what you mean. It's not primitive. And this is a real design insight, but it's not over designed. None of this stuff is. It's exactly perfect, the exact perfect combination of resources, obligations, humans and requirements. People miss
yeah,
how powerful it is. I agree. Anyway, carry on. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, I learned about these gatherings, and I did a lot on my own for the first year or maybe 2 years, and just hitting a lot of rocks and skinning a lot of animals and making a lot of mistakes, and I mean, just doing ridiculous stuff that I would not do now, like 4 day old roadkill deer, trying to skin it and eat it, like that kind of stuff. Just no, I just going in blind, you know. But I little by bit, little by little. I mean, all these beings teach you too. They miss humans, is what I got to. Like the
Yeah.
stone people miss the humans, the animals miss the humans, the plants they miss us. And so if we give it time, like the slowness and the devotion, then they teach us. And I mean, I'm always hesitant to talk about this stuff in some circles because it immediately gets shut down as woo woo. But it's fucking real. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's they speak, and if you treat them like they're alive and they can communicate, then they will communicate back, and you can learn and you can be in relation with them. So, you know, the stones taught me a lot, just picking up stones and hitting them and seeing who makes a cutting edge and who is brittle and what this happens. And then I did dive into the gatherings, which I mean, some of these gatherings are 500 people. They've been going for 40 years. And you have elders and experts from all over the world who are just really amazing. And so, yeah, I kind of like fine tuning some details. I apprenticed under a bow maker. That's where I met my bow teachers. I had two bow teachers, and where I work on my flint knapping skills. And but you know, these gatherings are 1 week a year, or maybe I go to 2 or 3 a year, and then the rest of the year is spent in devotional, academic. There's not a lot of books that I can retain. You know, there's books on the subject, and they're really nerdy and awesome for a lot of people, but I have to have it in my hands, and I have to be tactile doing something. I can't read about how to hit a rock in a certain way. I just have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. No, that's yeah, I like that. That's really interesting. And yeah, they so when you say there's not a lot of books you can retain, I also wonder. So something you said during the email exchange, I want to get back to the hunting in a minute, but we'll land it here, is that you ended up investigating what you called intentionally destroyed leather making processes. So um, talk us through, I guess, that bit of the journey, right? Like, because it also involved going to Europe and looking at like being on ancestral country and sort of feeling your way through, I guess, ancestrally relevant ways of doing this stuff. But what pinged my interest was when you said there were intentionally destroyed leather making processes. So take us there.
Yeah. Yeah. So through the roadkill journey, I started by bark tanning. So, okay, just to clarify, there's two major ways of tanning, turning animal skin into leather. One using barks of trees, which is primarily European peoples. There's other peoples that do it. And then there's using oils, so brains or fish oil, and they make two different leathers. And so I started by doing bark tanning, unknowing I didn't know it was a European tradition at that point. But then I quickly got into brain tanning because more people here in the States have started reviving this brain tanning process. So brain tanning was how many of the indigenous people of this continent made their clothing. Weather permitting, some of the coastal people, it's not applicable because the skins would rot. But it's how a lot of indigenous people made their clothing using the brain. So it's called brain tanning, and you mix the brains with water, and that's how you soften the hide. Which is this is all I'm wearing right now is brain tan. Um, and so I met the woman whose ranch I live on right now, Katie Russell, and she had been learning. She's a little bit older than me, so she kind of took me on as a apprentice of sorts. And she, if she listens to this, she's going to be embarrassed, but she's probably one of the nation's best brain tanners. She would never say that, but she's pretty internationally recognized. And so I started doing a lot of tanning with her, and started looking into the history of it. Of course, it's kind of murky history. You can find some accounts of, in the Civil War, the soldiers were wearing brain tan breeches because the stickers don't stick in it as much as cotton or wool. But there wasn't a lot of information other than this is how Native Americans used to do it, which, wasn't enough. So this gets into some other stuff, but I ended up befriending a bunch of tribal people, and spent time on reservations and hearing more directly from them about the tradition of brain tanning, and how during reservation, sorry, it's really wow, I didn't realize how charged it is for me still. When people were forced on the reservations, they weren't allowed to tan hides anymore, and like upon pain of death in a lot of cases, or like torture or beatings. And so they forced these people on the reservations, and so they weren't allowed to hunt in a lot of cases. But they would still get cow hides, and the old women would be out there tanning, or they'd go poach deer, whatever. They were keeping their life ways away in ways that people weren't aware of. But in a lot of cases, if people were caught brain tanning, I mean, it was part of the cultural genocide, right? Like if you take away people's food source, their clothing
Yeah.
source, the way they play, all of that, like you obliterate. Supposedly that was the program, anyways. It didn't actually happen that way, but so it was very intentionally destroyed. And so I try to make that correction when people say, "Oh, it's a lost art." I'm like, it's
No, I
not.
guess
It was not lost. These
it was
people didn't
attacked.
just drop it on the trail somewhere.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
like that. I knew there'd be a story behind it, and yeah, that's a common one, I'm afraid. So tell us about, because I want to get back to animals teaching things, right? Obviously, but tell us about, I guess, maybe the first bow kill, right? Like, tell us. I mean, presumably that your first kill intentionally was the rat, but tell us maybe like the next one up from rat after that.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, there were some in between that I don't want to disregard either. Like a fawn had been hit by a car in front of me and was still alive. And so that one I scooped up. She was the next one I scooped up and held her in my arms. And I had a really dull knife on me, and I killed her. I cut her throat while I was holding her in my arms. Just really blood, and it was brutal. And those people just kept driving. They didn't even stop to see if that little baby deer was okay or not. Um, and so there were a couple other roadkills that I had killed, which I'm not convinced whether or not I would do that now. And that's a whole nother conversation. But just I was nervous and I didn't know, and I thought that was the right thing to do. And now I think sometimes animals need to go through their own process, and me stepping in to kill them isn't necessarily a honorable thing, or what they need or what they want. But that was in my beginning days. And so while I was learning how to make bows and arrows and flint knap and tan hides and make bone tools and all of that, I did start hunting with a rifle,
Okay.
because I knew that the journey towards bow hunting would be so long that I wanted the direct relation with them and to be successful. And so I started hunting with a rifle, and I still have hunted, just this year I was hunting with a rifle, and I have mixed feelings about that, but I am doing it. So the first deer I killed with a rifle was he's so sweet. His skull is hanging in my house. I was just talking to him before I came up here and asked him if I could tell the story.
Good.
So I had crawled up on my belly early in the morning, and I didn't know how to hunt. I guess I just showed up. And the thing that I realize is, if you're living in a way that is a love song to the plants and the animals, and if you're living in a way that you really are like at least on your good days, trying so hard to uphold your end of the agreements with them, then that fable relationship that we hear about as kids of
Yeah.
like the animals will give themselves to you, it's actually real.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not just when you go out on the weekend hunt once a year and the deer is going to walk up to you. That's, I don't know. Maybe that works for some people. It doesn't work for me. You know, it was a lot of dedication, a lot of years. So when I went out, and I don't really know, I didn't know how to track. I didn't really know about animal. I mean, I knew a little bit, but so it was crawling on my belly and there were a bunch of deer. It was the rut. So the deer and the does are all playing and chasing each other. And I was praying, and I had done a lot of praying, a lot of offering, um, and a lot of trying to make a case, right? That's what it is. It's like I'm not asking this animal to die for me. I'm actually making a case for why I'm worthy. And I think
Yeah.
that's a pretty big difference actually.
Yeah,
Is I'm not
absolutely.
going pleading like, "Oh, I want you to die for me." I'm trying to live in a way where I am recognized by the deer as worthy of their
Yeah.
gifts. And I take no for an answer. There's a lot of years I haven't gone home with any meat, you know? And for
So I
whatever
want to
reason,
just interrupt there. So, like the Tuta Hill Maya stuff comes from one of my favorite authors, Martin Prechtel. And I have a quotation. I
oh
want you
yeah,
to hear this. This is from a Tuta Hill trained shaman, right? The animal
yeah.
killed for food is not a poor thing. He is a courageous being giving his life to you for your well being. He is superior to you. This means you have an obligation to become an equally glorious human being with a soul of such generosity that it is worth the animal's gift of having died to support you and your people. That way, when you die, you become something worth descending from.
Whoa, that is, I couldn't have said it better myself. Wow. That's like all, oh man, that is
Yeah,
good.
yeah, he's one of my favorite authors.
Wow.
Like, yeah, it's
Ah,
but like it just what you were saying of like, um, you it is you're making a case. This is how the Amazonians do it as well, right? Like with the Amazonian tribes, it's the same thing. They make a case to the mother of that animal, and as to because you're expecting this in their case, like this being, this overlord soul being, to give you one of her children. Make the case, you know.
right. Yeah, and
Mm.
live it and follow through. And you're gonna forget because you're human, and that's part of our blessing curse thing, the forgettery. But then come back to center again. And yeah, so that deer, it was it was that scenario where I was on my belly watching the deer, and a buck turned right towards me and looked me right in the eyes and walked straight towards me. And my heart's just pounding out of my chest. And I'm thinking, is this actually, like, am I mistaking this? I don't know. Is he actually coming towards me or what? And then I have imposter syndrome and all that. And I have a lady friend with me because I run a women's hunting camp now. This was the very beginning stages of the women's hunting camp. One of my lady friends, I was like, "Do you see this?" She's like, "Yeah, he's walking towards you." And he walked right at me and stopped not very far away, I don't know, 40 feet away, and turned broadside and looked at me again, looked me in the eyes. And I asked, "Is this you? Is this what it is?" And he just stared at me, and I shot him. And it was that easy, you know. And then, well, then he I didn't kill him with one shot, and he walked off, and I had to find him. And I kind of lost him for a while, and I regretted hunting and thought I would never hunt again. And then I mean, I was wailing, bawling because I didn't know how to track. And I thought, oh my God, I just made a mistake. And maybe he wasn't giving himself to me. And I just wounded this animal. And now he's out there dying a slow, horrible death. What did I do? And so I tracked him for a long time. I mean, like 5 hours going far and wide and all of that. And then finally, I went right back to where I shot him. And he was maybe 30, 40 feet away. I'd gone miles all over this mountain looking for him. He was 30, 40 feet away, and he was still alive. He was laying down. And I remember getting to him, and I just fell on my knees, just weeping and weeping, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I hurt you. I didn't know. Like, I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I was doing a good thing." And he's looking at me in the eyes, and I held his hands. And I just got this sense like, well, I'm teaching you. Like,
Mm.
this was part of the agreement. Like, you're a Western white girl, I'm English, Irish, and Scandinavian, but you're this person who has no idea what she's doing. Like, of course, like, this is what I signed up for. You know, I'm teaching you. And I held his head in my hands. And he's still breathing. He's looking me in the eyes. And I was like, okay, this is it then. Is this the time? And he said, yeah, it's the time. And then I was able to plunge a knife into his jugular while I was kissing him on the mouth. And that's how I killed him.
Very cool. Very cool. Good story. Wow, that's really nice. The there's similar accounts in the colonial history of the US to Australia when the Europeans arrived. The animals were just, it was like, I remember hearing about it in school. It's like they weren't used to being hunted. And I'm like, well, that's not true. The Australian Aborigines have been hunting them for 50,000 years, but they were hunting them correctly. So it was this kind of different way of like, oh, you're right in front of me. I'll just, effing shoot you. And that's
Yeah.
always stayed with me. This when you get it right, when you're in right relation, um, this is what happens. That's great
Yeah.
story. Yeah, very
Yeah.
cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say that like the the least important part about hunting camp for me is killing someone. That's actually not the reason I hold a women's hunting camp. That's not why I go hunting. It's more about the courtship and the romance and the love of them and all but there's so much, right? Then being able to use as much as you can of that animal to make beautiful things and to honor the gifts that they're giving. Um, I really do think you're recognized when you approach them in that way. And like I said,
Yeah,
there's been a lot of years I've gone hunting and I haven't even seen an animal. I mean,
yeah,
hunting for 10 days, 2 weeks at a time, not even a single critter on the landscape. And that's okay. That's when I spend most of the time at the fire praying and making offerings. Um, I wanted to say too, so that was in the beginning days of like my women's hunting camp, which has evolved now. And something that one of my teachers, her name is Phoenicia Madrano, Tranny Granny, we call her. She's dead now. She died a couple years ago, but she taught me a lot about reciprocal relationship with the living world. And she really turned me on to this idea of, well, okay, what does it mean? What obligations do you have to that animal? If you're taking one of their own, what obligations do you have to their family? And it's not necessarily like spiritual offerings. Yes, I do that too. But it's like physically, what do you owe them? And
yeah,
so, of course, it like hit me. Oh my God, I should plant their fucking food. Like,
yeah,
duh. Like, if I'm eating them, then I need to feed them. And it's not like feed them with also with my prayers, but not just the symbolic whatever metaphysical realm, but actually planting physical forage for them. And so now, as part of my hunting practice, whatever ecosystem I'm hunting, whatever animal I'm hunting, I have like big bags of seeds specific to that ecosystem, specific to that animal. So deer and elk, like wildflower seeds in those zones or whatever. I also hunt bear. I haven't been successful with bear, but with bear, I bring fruit seeds or like baby fruit trees out. And this is often illegal in some place. On federal land, it's illegal to plant plants actually, which is part of the, I don't know, kind of the shit show of that legal system. But so physically, before I do anything, before I even approach these animals, go into their homes, stalk them, do anything, we're out for days planting physical food for them. And they really need it. A lot of these ecosystems are getting overrun with, whether it's toxic runoff from industry or overgrazing from cattle and domestic sheep projects on our national lands or whatever it is, or overgrazing and all the stuff that's happening. These, not only do the plants really need us, but the animals really need us too. And I think we're supposed to be a keystone species.
yeah,
And I think that we were given thumbs. One of the reasons we're given thumbs were to plant seeds and to caretake. And I think unless you're actually you have a lived relationship with these plants and the animals, and eating them seems to help with that a lot. Eating them seems to, for me, it was years of eating wild plants and wild animals before I was kind of calibrated to being able to even hear them well and understand the things that they were saying, how they were communicate. It's a different calibration, molecularly, also spiritually, all of that. And so, like, once you're able to listen to them, you have this direct relationship. Oh, I'm relying on the gifts of these deer people for my winter supply of meat. So I actually am relying on it, which I could still go to the store. Granted, I don't have money often in my life, which is a chosen path to keep me in integrity towards these beings. But right, so if you're really actually truly reliant on them, then you're more willing to follow through with your obligation. You have, because now when they're having a hard time, like the deer in our area are having a hard time right now, I feel it physically. You know, I've eaten so many of them, I really feel like I'm structured of their bodies, you know, and I'm so indebted to them. I mean, that's right. That's the key word here, is indebtedness. And I think that's a holy word, actually, that maybe Western Civ has parasitized for its own uses. Indebtedness, you know, debt. We think of debt as something we need to escape from and pay off as soon as possible to like end that relationship. But actually, that indebtedness, I don't think it's ever supposed to be. Well, first of all, I could never repay the indebtedness I owe to those plants and animals. Even if I did it every second for the rest of my life, it's still more massive than I could ever do. And so that reciprocity is the organ of reciprocity isn't meant to be shut. It's not, I'm not trying to repay the deer so that I don't have to owe them anything anymore, because it's
Exactly. It
continual.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, you know how or mag trains work, or in theory work, where you've got, like, let's say the track is south, and the underside of the train is north, dipole magnet. So you kind of tip the magnet and it'll move. It's the
Mhm.
energy. So the word is like Aini in
Mm.
the Andes. The earliest word, which we learned from Tyson Yunkaporta, or earlier word for dream time, was the turnaround. And it's the same idea of the you can't stop that. It's not a credit card that you pay off and cut up. Like, um, it's literally like the movement of the energy between the spirit world and the physical, or the invisible
Wow.
and visible, is this. It's this cycle, this turnaround, this Aini. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, very
Yeah, the
cool.
propulsion behind it. I like that idea of the magnets, because it really is a propulsion to
Yeah.
keep you on your toes and on duty. And
Well, if
um,
you stop doing it, the whole thing falls apart. And that's the whole kind of point. Like, humans are, an important and essential component of this movement, right? So again, another
yeah.
story from Aboriginal Australia I've always liked is, early colonial, encounters on the east coast, where tribes would build watering holes for the kangaroos, and they weren't
Wow.
trapped. So they weren't like waiting in the bushes for the kangaroos to come and have a drink and then spear them. They were like, no, no, well, they don't have the right kind of hands to build a watering hole. And so
Oh,
that's the obviously they do hunt them, right? Like,
yeah,
but they don't hunt them there. This is a very
yeah.
similar version of what you're talking about, which is, this is the other side of that obligation. They need
Yeah.
water, and we have hands. So,
Oh,
they would build watering hole, and it's the same kind of process, right? It's not that they didn't hunt them, but
mhm.
kangaroo can't build watering holes. So, yeah.
Right. Oh, I love that. It's similar to the buffalo here, or bison, if you want to call them by the Latin name. All my tribal friends call them buffalo. But the buffalo, you know, they make wallows. They like piss and paw out these depressions that are maybe, you know, let half an acre or something, and then they rub in it, and the oils. This is actually a buffalo right here. The oils from their wool kind of pack the soil down, and so then come spring, you know, on the plains, which often people think of as a dry grassland, but there were millions upon millions of these wallows that held water, which then created riparian zones for all the frogs and the riparian birds and sedges and reeds and stuff like that. And there's really no supposed reason for the buffalo to do this other than they're creating homes for other animals, you know? And so, right, looking, and this is one of the ways you can start to approach learning from animals, is look at what they do. Look at how they
Yeah.
are themselves. And and not in a takey grabby way, but try to emulate them and see their generosity and their love and their care for each other. And you know, if we can start undoing some of the more Darwinian, like competitive biology theories, then we can actually see them for what they are, which is cooperative. And how can we, and so, right, but then we're in this industrial, post-industrial landscape, and how can I participate in the wild world when, first of all, I'm not allowed to live there full time, and how can I be of service to them? And it's going to look different for everyone, and it looks different month to month, but how you can be in service to the living world, I think, is, if people ask that question more, then things would look a lot different. And two, I think that it's not a coincidence that there's so many mass extinctions that kind of corroborate corroborate the time when people stopped asking the animals to come back.
Yeah.
As part of hunting, that was a huge part of the ceremony. Is, for a lot of people, it's not completely gone. I don't want to erase them with my words, but a lot of the ceremony is pleading for the animals to come back, for the animal that you hunted to come back. And so, I mean, a lot of folks stopped doing that, kept killing animals, and now we have these mass extinctions everywhere. And so I think it's high time for us to start asking the animals to come back again.
Agreed. Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Vine Deloria spoke about that. I have it in my book, where at the time when there were so many buffalo, at the change of season, the plains peoples would be like, yeah, they go into the other world, because the question of like,
Mm-hmm.
where did they go? They're not a small animal. When
Yeah.
there was lots of them, where did they go? And it's like, oh, they go into the other world, and they would be called back, right? So he spoke at the Sierra Club in like the 80s about extinction, and he's like, my people don't actually believe in extinction. um, like these things can come back from the other world, if they're called
Yeah.
back, right? Or if you create the conditions for their return. Which, funnily enough, on the edges of and I have many political problems with like conservation science and invasion biology and all these, again, imperial ideas. But that
Yeah.
happens where you begin the process of allocating uh, chunks of country to like, okay, cool, we're going to like protect stuff because we've lost a bunch of species. The ones that they think they've lost come back, right? And it's even just that sense of attending to them. And I don't mean, and
Yeah.
again, another, I don't think anyone listening to this or watching this is going to think, oh, they don't care about extinction. That's not
Right.
that's not what I said. What I said
Right.
was, all is not lost, and in fact, there are things
Yeah.
you can do. Right? I don't mean like, oh,
That's
fuck
right.
it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think you got to start by getting to know these beings. It's not. I don't think it's enough to get a field guide and look at the pretty flowers on your hike and keep on hiking. Like, that's a good place to start, but I think actually getting to know these beings intimately, which for me, eating them, the plants included. I live in an ecosystem now where it's called the biscuit country, and so the wild plants around this area, we get these really amazing big fat wild roots that are really amazing. Honestly, like, it's the Garden of Eden here. It's, most people think it's a barren sagebrush steppe desert, which it is. It's a high country desert, but in the springtime, every footstep you take, you're stepping on food, including on your nature hikes. And a lot of people don't. They can't even perceive. They can't perceive who is all around them all of the time, and so. And then you do start perceiving them, and you can maybe call them by their Latin names, which they don't like because they're not Romans. And but you start this little intimate relationship, maybe like learn what this plant's used for, but then it's not, a lot of people stop there. So what I've seen too is, in this kind of skillsy, primitive skills, ancestral skills, wild crafting world, a lot of people will start harvesting, right? And that's a good, it's a good way to have relation with plants and get them into your diet, into your body, and but then it's the same colonial mindset of
yeah,
going out and taking. And now a lot of places are getting over harvested, and this is what Tranny Granny, my teacher Tranny Granny, really drilled home. She spent 30 years on horseback, planting back what she called the hoop, which was the native foods, wild foods circuits of the like northwest states, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Nevada. And she saw the colonizer in us, and she fucking ripped it out. It was brutal. Tranny Granny was a hard teacher to have, but I'm so blessed to have had her at least a little bit in my life, because I was one of those people going out and harvesting, and I had tinctures, and I was eating wild foods, and I was feeling really good and really radical about myself, and I remember one day she's like, in this group of people, she said, "How many of you guys have ever harvested a wild berry?" And of course, everybody at this gathering, "Oh, me, I have." Everyone's super excited to show off. She's like, "How many of you have ever planted a single berry?" And nobody raised their hand. And that, I mean, that's really when it sunk in of like, wow, I'm doing the exact same cultural genocide on these plants that I supposedly worked so hard to decondition, decolonize myself. But I'm still doing it. And even in the way I was harvesting, going out and taking a whole plant rather than like the deer does. When the deer walks by, the deer nibbles the tip of the leaf, And so taking it one step farther, having a relationship with these beings, but that relationship then is not a taking relationship. It's what do these plants actually need then from us? And a lot of them need to be planted. That was the old original instructions with a lot of the tribes here was as you dig, you leave the holes open and you plant the seeds back in. Because once the
Yeah.
sun comes, it bakes it, and the seeds have a hard time penetrating. So you leave holes and you take out the sod that the cattle grazing, all the cheat grass and stuff that the cows have brought in. And so this wild tending, and this term is also kind of overused, and I don't know if it's necessarily applicable to my specific little like thoughts on it. But actually physically planting the wild foods back and these plants and these medicines back. And in a lot of places, for instance, tiger lily, which used to be a major food source for people in this area, is almost extinct now. And it's illegal. It's a federal offense to dig a tiger lily bulb, but that's what they need. They need you to dig them because they have these little babies on there that you can replant. And so a lot of these plants, like they actually really miss us and
Exactly.
they love
Yeah.
us and they need us.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
one of the biggest books in this kind of world that happened maybe 10 years ago in Australia was called The Biggest Estate on Earth. And it's
Hmm.
the uncovering of the fact that, when the British showed up, even though it looked like parkland when they got here, it looked like a capability brown English parkland. They're like, oh, it's wild and untamed. It's like, no, it's been under management for 50,000 years. Like it's an estate. And when we
Wow.
don't do that, the play like a really good and obvious example is that the fuel load builds up and we get, which we've had the last few years, historic fires. But Aboriginal Australia mastered fire millennia ago, and the place you have stories of like the British ships going up the east coast, and there was basically smelling smoke the whole way up because it's under management, right? And that's not just to prevent bushfires. That's so that there's space between trees for kangaroos and the rest of it. Same thing in the Amazon. The Amazon's an overgrown garden. Like the idea that there's a wild that is or a nature that's separate from humans is a silly 19th century idea where it's coming back to that obligation. It doesn't mean we own it. It doesn't mean you know any of that kind of stuff. But we belong in I don't even like the word systems. We belong in these communities and have a role to play.
That's right. Yeah,
Mm.
that's right. And now as things continue to change too with whatever global weirding patterns are happening and there's all this kind of climate chaos and industrial pollution and all of that, I think it gets harder because I'm coming into this thinking like trying to piece together some semblance of something, some sane way of relating to these beings. But they also, the plants, especially right now, at least in my area, the trend has been that it's warming and it's getting warmer earlier in the spring, like a lot warmer since I've been here. And I keep track on a calendar. It's, this year was a full month early. And so they're growing, they're flowering, they're going to seed, they're drying out and they're blowing away a lot earlier. And so like a lot of plants are having a hard time, right? And so I I guess like part of the awakening to this living world is also that you're going to awaken to a lot of pain and suffering too, and it's
Yeah.
really hard. And
Yeah.
so but that doesn't mean you're off duty. Like you still are required. And so for instance, one thing that we started doing in our area is moving wild plants from, for instance, like the south facing hills just to the north side of the hill, just to give them, a little bit more shade, and not moving the whole plants. They're seeds. We're bringing seeds. And that's an easy, manageable task. It's not like we're trying to garden this whole mountain range. It's just while you're on a walk, grab some seeds from the south side, move them to the north side and put them in. And at least in that way, helping the plants in whatever ways that I can see with my tiny little vision of, like, who knows how narrow I actually, and I don't know how much I'm helping, but it's a way of interacting. And a lot of us, myself included, a lot of these other people who are on the wild food circuits, we're starting to bring seeds, like duffel bags full of seeds, further south, for instance, as things are warming up and things are, changing. We're like trying to bring these seeds, these plants, to places where they're going to survive. And if they don't survive, that's fine. But if they do somewhere else, then that's great too. And so trying to move them around, because I think that's what humans have always done. We
Oh,
help
absolutely.
the beings around us. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's reminding me, we should, because I want to talk about a little bit about the women's hunting camp and like the Buffalo Bridge Project and other kind of training things. But I did put some slides together from the images you
Nice.
sent. They're just basically images, but we were sort of talking about buffalo and so on. This one, I watch Yellowstone, the show. I'm sure you don't. This
Yeah.
looks like it's near there. Where's this?
Yeah, that's right outside of Yellowstone.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry, did you ask a question that I just missed?
No, no, no. It's just like it was more because at the beginning I thought you still lived near Yellowstone, but like I
Yeah,
watched the TV show Yellowstone and absolutely love it, and like the hills look like that from the TV show. So I'm like, this is
totally.
gonna be near
Yeah.
Yellowstone. Yeah, cool.
So yeah, this is north. This is right at the boundary. I wonder if you could see it in there. So the north entrance to Yellowstone is in a town called Gardner, and then there's an annex to Yellowstone that a lot of people don't know is actually an annex. It's a pretty small tract of land, maybe 5 miles or something, that used to be a farm that then was granted to Yellowstone. And right outside of that is the tribal hunting grounds. And so I think there's 8 tribes that hunt to this day, and they're only allowed to hunt in this tiny, tiny, tiny little section, which is where we're at now. And I'm not joking, Gordon. It's a section that's maybe a mile wide
Right. Okay.
and a mile deep, where like 8 different tribes come for from November to March to hunt. They're not allowed to hunt bison in the park because of all the federal rules and stuff. And I thought the tourists would hate it. But yeah, so this is right at the hunting grounds, this tiny, tiny little piece of land where most of the hunting goes. There is another parcel of hunting grounds that's kind of up in the high country a little bit. That's pretty hard to get to, and the bison don't really move down there. So how Yellowstone is set up, this is a river valley, and the bison in the midwinter, they'll move along that river bottom, so it bottlenecks them into this hunting zone. They're not really up in the high country too much because it's too much snow. They can't get down to the
Sure.
forage. Hmm.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And one of the things you over this journey, because I do want to talk about these two projects, but the professional big game skinning, did that come about in relation to these? Well, yeah, tell us how that came about.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, it
Well,
came
that's a big one.
right after the first year. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
The first year at Buffalo Bridge, I realized that I was in love with Montana. And so I was living out of my vehicle at the time, following around. I was traveling, doing a lot of research on the history of the bison and the bison people and traditions and, all that kind of stuff. And I ended up landing in a small town in Montana and scored myself a skinning gig at the butcher shop. I thought I'd only be there for 5 or 6 weeks during the season. And then I lived there for 4 years as a professional big game skinner and learned a lot. And my sweetheart, my ex now, the man I fell in love with, which is why I stayed around for 4 years, he ran a mobile slaughter. And
Mhm.
so he had a kill truck and he would go out and kill for the little local ranches and nothing big. I mean, we weren't federally like no FDA approval. So it was all just for the families straight back into their
Sure.
freezers. Yeah, so I helped run a mobile slaughter, and then during hunting season skinned all the big game that came through, and it was amazing because I got to dedicate a lot more of my life to that landscape, which is, yeah, where the Buffalo Bridge project is too, right by Yellowstone. Because Ennis, so where I was living was about 45 minutes from Yellowstone, and so it was a migration corridor coming out of there. So it's all the same animals that lived in Yellowstone. So yeah, honestly a lot of what I've learned as an adult in this came directly from those animals and all the gifts they have. And I can honestly say that most of what I have in my life right now, and one of the only reasons my life is possible in the way that it is because of the animals and
Mm.
because of the gifts that they've given, and how they've ushered me along this crazy path.
So, um, when I lived in London, I had a job over a plague pit in Charterhouse Square, and it was next to Smithfield Market, which is the oldest and I think largest meat market existing still in Europe. Like it's medieval, right?
Whoa.
And Austin Osman Spare, speaking of chaos magic, was born and raised in that area in the early 20th century. And he would say, as a kid growing up, wandering around Smithfield, that there were all these little animal ghosts. Like it was quite
Wow.
crowded with animal ghosts. And what the big game skinning job and that sort of experience in butchery and mobile butchery, what was that like being in the industry in terms of animal ghosts? Because I feel like if you're doing big game, although that like we're friends, we get our meat locally. We're friends with the Huon Valley butchers, so like they, if you want people who are respectful of animals and animal health and know what's going on with them, it's them, right? But what was that
Yeah.
like in terms of? Do you have ghost stories of being in a butchery in the same way? I mean, Austin Spear can kind of like, he was one of the accidental cornerstones of chaos magic, but he was quite sensitive to that kind of stuff. Tell me about animal ghosts in a butchering context.
Yeah, wow. So the butcher I worked for, it was a very small butcher, not this big, not a big massive scale by any means. Only a couple meat cutters and then me as the skinner. So didn't have the same vibe as like industrialization of slaughter and death.
Okay,
So
yeah.
things moved a little bit slower. So that is a marked difference than some of the horror stories I've heard from other places.
Well, Smithfield was huge, right? I think that's what he was picking up on was like,
Yeah,
and it was used to be the eastern edge of London. It's obviously not now, but so animals would come in from the east and they would be slaughtered and cut up there and sold into the city. So
yeah,
yeah, it's got
yeah,
and yeah, and I just that interests me, right? It sort of came to my head. I'm like, oh yeah, Austin Spare.
yeah.
Cool. So I mean, in a way, that's good then. If your butcher isn't haunted, they're probably doing something right. You know?
Or I mean, when I got there, there was some disconcerting things the way the animals were being treated. Old Italian butchers from New Jersey, the guy who owned the shop, he would be like, for instance, like tired and moving through and he'd like kick a dead animal that was in his way, like that kind of stuff. Also seeing heads and legs in a trash can with like beer bottles and cigarette butts on it and stuff. And so there was some there was definitely some problems when I got there. But then, being outside by myself, everybody else was inside, so I had the whole skinning station to myself. I was able to kiss every animal on the mouth and thank them and sing to them and love on them. And a lot. I would say that most of the animals that came in uh, had some. They had the life still in their eyes because they were freshly hunted, and with some of them, with a lot of them, it felt like they had never been thanked, you know and that there was this static stuckness because those hunters had never even thanked them. And so I guess I fell into this rhythm with them of like, okay, this is why I am here. It's not to like amass hides and blah blah blah. It's so actually so I can thank every single animal that comes through and show them the love and the respect that they actually deserve. And so, and there were a couple animals that came in that I could tell had been so brutalized, shot 6 times, as they're running away, and just brutalized. And they're what the consequences of that are really painful for an animal to go through. And so, not to say that I know how to assuage that pain for that deer or anything like that. I'm not trained in any of those techniques, but just being with them, and loving on them and thanking them and doing my best by them. But there is, ghost stories. There is, I am when you said that, I remembered, well, two memories. One, I was skinning this antelope. This is probably my third season there. So, I'd skinned over 1,000 big game at that point, which you get into the muscle memory. And I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't being fully present with this being. And whatever, I was listening to a podcast. I might have been listening to your podcast, and just going about my thing. And I wasn't paying attention at all. And I had this antelope's leg down to try to break the leg off, and it slipped and it slammed me in the face so hard. Oh, so hard. And at first I was pissed, and then I was like, wait, this is this animal telling me, like, pay attention. And so I stopped and I looked, and this animal's leg had been broken while it was alive and had reformed in a C shape, had healed completely in a C shape. And I was just skinning this animal, not paying attention at all. I would have just put it in the pile, but it smacked me so hard. And it was really cool to see, like, wow, I wonder what happened to this antelope and what life did they live. And so that was one of the big wake up calls, and I'll tell you one more, just because it's pretty hilarious, I think. I was doing the same thing with an elk. I just was in my zone, not paying attention. Who knows what thoughts I was thinking, which I also think it's really important to keep your mind clear when you're attending a threshold. That is a threshold. They're coming in with the life still in their eyes. And me skinning them is the transformation from living animal in a field to somebody's food. I think it's this alchemical intimacy. And so I think it's really important to be pretty aware and pretty clear. And I wasn't. I was doing whatever, just in my zone. And I was this elk had been skinned, and he was hanging by his back legs, huge, massive elk. And the hunters have to leave the sex organs on the animal to prove the sex. And so I was whatever, like wasn't really paying attention. I was pushing him into the cooler, and I thought, oh, well, I got to cut that elk penis off before it goes into the cooler. And so I stretched I stretched down this elk penis to, like, cut it off at the base. And I wasn't doing it in a good way. I was just like, whatever, and blah, blah, I'm working. And I stretched it, and it was really long. And I stretched it, and when I cut it, it like a big rubber band smashed me in the face. Oh my, like, knocked me backwards. And that's when I was like, okay, this elk was pissed. I was cutting his penis off, like, not even paying attention, And so there's my little haunted house
That's cool.
butcher
No, I
story.
like it. I like it. I think you're onto something with that feeling that you were. That's a big part of why you were there, right? So this is the other end of it. This is the consumption end, because there aren't that many people praying and paying the respect to animals that are going through this process. But during my shamanic healing training, Alberto Violdo says, like, when he was asked, because he does all these books on nutrition and such as well, he's like, what's the one thing people can do first up to step into a healthier way of eating? What's the biggest and first thing they can do? And he says, bless your food. Like, bless your food and be thankful for it. Is a powerful change to the energy. And it's another one of those things we don't do anywhere in the process, right? And that's new. Right? That's new within the last few centuries, because it like saying grace around, like, for all of Christian European history, you are thankful, at least to the cosmos in the form of God, for your food. But that's just like the best thing you can do to, like, move your food into a healthy direction is to bless it. And it's just what you were saying reminded me of that. So if you're listening to this, people, and you aren't, a professional big game skinner, you are a person who eats food, and bless it as a kind of, if you're thinking with what's going on with this episode. All right.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So I want to talk about, because for people listening to this, the images are on the show notes. But I want to talk about some of the training that you're doing and the teaching groups, like the hunting group and the other kind of skills groups, and the sort of why of it, because I think it's really important. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah. Should I talk about the photo? Is
Yeah,
that my
go for it.
segue
So,
or?
like, for people listening, well, you explain the photo. Tell us what's going on.
Okay, yeah, in this one, we're at Buffalo Bridge, which is our big buffalo camp, and there's two young women there, my little nieces. And, at camp, we often set up mouse traps because the mice are running all over camp trying to eat our food. And that's the kids' task. They set up the trap line, and they're just little, the mouse traps you buy at the store. They set up their little trap line. And then when we get one or two or however five, six, then I teach the kids how to skin them and gut them and eat them. And we eat every part, except for the intestines, but we eat all the organs and the bones and everything, the tail. And so in this photo, I'm skinning a mouse with those two little girls. And so I do this, in the beginning of camp, and then the rest of camp, it's up to the kids, and they're like, that's how they're contributing to camp life and to the meals. And yeah, we sing songs and we pray and we give thanks. And then I teach them how to tan the little hides too. So they eat these little tiny little mouse hides that are tanned, and which are super cute for their little fairy houses. They're like
Oh, yeah, cool.
bedspreads for the little fairy house. Yeah.
Mhm. Like,
Mhm.
and so this would be more the same process there. That's a great cape she's got on.
I know.
Or cloak.
That is
Yeah.
Lure. She has been coming to our camp since she was 3. And she is a spectacular young woman. I mean, really one of those children that something is sparkling through her that I don't think this world's seen in a long time. So
You
yeah,
can always
similar thing. That's a
you can always
coyote
see that in the
skin.
photo, actually. Yeah. You can always see that in the
Yeah,
photo, actually. Yeah. Mm.
yeah, she's wonderful, and that's the thing. So the kids are always we always have kids multi-generational presence at our camps and at the gatherings and at our classes, and the kids are interacting with death. A lot of people, I get a lot of concern, I think, from some people that it's too much for the kids, or aren't they scared, or what's it like for them to be around this much animal death. And there's no if the what I've found is that if the if the adults have trauma around animal death and they perpetuate that trauma, the kids will pick up on whatever weird shit they got going on. But if all the adults around them are calm and loving and approaching death in this way, then the kids just naturally do it. There's no fear. There's no cry. We cry, in grief, but it's
Sure.
not like crying out of fear or anything like that. And so yeah, and Lure, this little girl, she's been our little apprentice, if you will. Gosh, she must be 9, 10 now, and she's been coming since she was 3. So she's tanned her own deer hides, and she's actually wearing a buckskin skirt that she tanned and made, and a little pouch around her neck that she tanned and made. And this upcoming year, will be her first year legally allowed to hunt.
Oh,
So she's
wow.
going to be at the women's camp. Yeah, and she's going to
Oh,
go for a
very
doe
cool.
this year.
Very cool. So
Yeah.
this is a leading question, or maybe it's an obvious question, but I still want to ask it anyway. Like, why a women's hunting camp? Like, you know what I mean, right?
Mhm.
Because I think that's
Yeah.
really powerful. That, yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah. So we I mean, I wanted to hunt. I started trying years ago, and I sought out teachers, and I had some really wonderful men teachers, including my ex-sweetheart. And I went out hunting a lot with guys, but their the approaches were so different, and I felt really stifled and not able to actually fully show up the way that I wanted to. And I've even had deer in the crosshairs with other men around that I didn't take the shot because I didn't feel like I would be able to honor them in the ways that I wanted to. And that it would be laughed at or like secretly scoffed at, you know how it is. And I mean, they're muggles too, so that has something to do with it.
Yeah.
But so, and even as a big game skinner and being, I can skin a critter pretty good, but I noticed that even me, with the amount of skill that I have, if there were men around, I would kind of step back. Maybe not, I would have imposter syndrome, maybe not think that it's a long social conditioning to defer to a man, right? And even I have it. And I thought that I did a lot of work on that. But even so, I was noticing I was stepping back. So I thought, well, shit, man, if I'm having this and I've skinned however many critters and I still have this, like, I don't really know, then maybe what would happen if we only had women together? And we created an intentionally magical space that is like broadcast. This is a magical space. It's not your like your hoedown. Well, there's a little hoedown in there, but it's specifically a space for us to make mistakes, to be ourselves, to pray, to cry, to not know how to use a gun at all, to like just come in completely just vulnerable, which can be hard for women and when there's men around. So it and like bless the differences between the two. I love the men that I've learned from. I wouldn't trade that for anything. But I never found a woman hunter that I wanted to learn from that was doing it in the ways that I was like kind of searching and didn't know what I was looking for. And so I just thought, well, okay, what if I just approach the animals, ask them how they want to be hunted, and use the animals as my primary guide in all of this, and my ancestors too, and got a bunch of women together so we could explore this together. And it's been really beautiful, women from all over the country showing up with various amounts of skill, most of us not very skilled at all. And just the amount of prayer and love and magic and exploration and ceremony and just being able to take our time with it and not be so, I think a lot of the time there's the like, well, just shoot them kind of thing in hunting. And so this is a completely different approach. And most women's hunting camps, we haven't killed anyone. And I don't think that that's a failure. I think that's actually a success, and it's inspired other women's hunting camps around, which is, I don't want to, it's not like I own this concept. I want women to feel free to, be in their own ecosystems and and start their relationship with their own critters that they live by.
Yeah, I think it's uncovering two powerful, almost like archetypal processes at once, right? Because first of all, it's the hunting thing, but second of all, there is a erroneous assumption that hunting is a exclusively male domain. And it's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Diana, the goddess for a start. So there's actually a potent archetype, and it is a different. So the story of Diana carries a different energy to like a Celtic horned god, like a wild hunt, right?
Mm,
It is
yeah,
actually the process is different, and it carries a different energy. So I think it's a
yeah,
great idea. I think it's this sort of it's a double reclamation for yeah, it's a double uncovering of and recognition of, as you just kind of said, like almost like the sanctity of both archetypes. It's not that one of them's better, but they do have
mm-hmm.
differences that you can
Yeah,
explore in this way. I think that's really cool. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's been beautiful, and we've also been, able to really embody and inhabit our masculinity too at the women's hunting camp, which
Nice.
is like an
Yeah.
added little bonus. Yeah,
Yeah, cool. So this
yeah.
is something I have not skinned any big game, and the
Hmm.
largest animal I've intentionally killed is a chicken.
Nice,
um,
nice.
but oh yeah, yeah, we do our. You can hear them. You can hear the boys. They
Mhm.
are. They'll be in the freezer soon. But
Bless them,
yeah,
little
no,
chickens.
we keep in the valley. Um, I don't see any reason for them not to live. Like chickens don't actually live that long anyway, but we give them a year and
Yeah.
they have their own space and they roam and we feed them. Either they either get killed or this is an interesting thing about the dysfunction with death, right? What happens to, because in the valley a lot of people raise chickens. Is once it is apparent that these ones are boys and aren't going to lay any eggs, in the middle of the night, people will leave them places like the nearby rugby field, and so there's these like lost boy gangs of roosters up and down the valley because people can't kill them, which is kind of fun in its own way. But they also, they get killed by quolls and what have you. But it's this
Right.
fascinating. I still think that's better, and it's sort of this characterful thing about the valley. I still think that's better than drowning them once they've been sexed as chicks, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
but I think, yeah, we end up we're growing these animals for, well, we are in a custodial relationship with these animals for a specific reason. We give them the best year, then and then that's how it goes. But yeah, so anyway, this, coming back to, if people are listening again, the images are in the show notes, is something I have more familiarity with. But is this from the same kind of, is this a different kind of workshop? Like, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, that's a bunch of different ciders and meads. So that's part of some of the classes that I teach is brewing, which of course I'm
Yeah.
very Scandinavian, and so mead is, you know, tied to a lot of our history as a people, and something I don't even drink. I'm sober now. Not because I'm a raging alcoholic, but just because the hangovers weren't worth it anymore. So yeah, but I continue to brew. And so this, what you're seeing is pears and apricots and apples. And I think it's hard to say that last one, some sort of medicinal root. And so for to brew, right, of course, using honey, then we're asking different spirits to come into the bottle, into the potions. And so I love the mixing of the plant world and all their medicines that they have to offer into the brew, so that the alcohol is actually medicine,
Yeah.
and can actually crack you open in different kinds of ways, right? And so yeah, medicine making, brewing, it's part of my ancestral reclamation. Mead making specifically, and we have mead horns that were Scottish Highlanders, so some of my people come from that place as well, that Scotty and I killed and then sanded out or whatever. So it's like, it's I kind of feel like a cheesy, like a LARPer Renaissance Festival girl or something, but like we have these big long horns, and it's exactly one wine bottle's worth. I was like,
Oh, really?
did
Okay,
they?
that's
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Like, oh, it's beautiful. So whenever I do imbibe, I mean, it's usually in ceremony and, with the horn, and try to be pretty intentional with it. So yeah, then what a great way to put away
Oh,
botanical
absolutely.
constituents
Yeah.
for the winter. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's really cool. So this is just pictures that again were sent through of and it's so that on the right there, looking at the is that, would that be brain tanning? I guess.
On the right, that's actually fat. That is caul
Oh, is it?
fat. So that is the
Okay.
internal fat of a goat. Isn't that
Okay.
beautiful? It looks like lace, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it
And
is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's fat. It's that it just was incredible. I had to like put a photo in there just because it's part of the right when people gut animals, oftentimes most of it goes into the compost. And so I'm pretty obsessed with what can we do with every single little part. And this one specifically, every time I find a piece like that, I'm like, I want to make a skirt with it or something, but it's fat. You can't, there's nothing, you can cook it, but you can't make clothing out of it. But every time I hold it up and I think, it's lace. So, and
Very
then, yeah, so that other photo is a photo of one of our lambs that we raised, was born and raised on the ranch that I live on. And that was one of the classes we did, the butchering class. Which, yeah, whenever we teach butchering, we go through how to use as much of the animal as I know how, which at this point is every part that I'm aware of, including all the lymph glands that are, all throughout the animal, like every bone, and of course there's so many more ways to use it, but that's something that we really
what do you
strive.
use lymph for? That's a new one for me.
Oh, you eat it. Yeah, you
Okay.
eat it, and a lot of people take it as desiccated pills for
Yeah,
hormonal
fair enough.
issues, thyroid issues, and that kind of stuff. And so, but it's like it's kind of, you kind of have to ease yourself into. I like it personally. I'll pop a whole raw gland and eat it whole, especially the adrenal glands, because it. I don't know, the constituents of those glands we're so deficient in that if you
Yeah, exactly.
actually get past the cultural conditioning that it's gross, your body just is like, I need that. And I'm salivating thinking about raw adrenal glands. Oh my gosh.
And I saw this on, I think, the gallery page, but I thought this is really fun. This is really cute. So it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, pictures of a
Yeah.
Bambi. Yeah,
Yeah. Just a little
yeah,
fawn we found. And I didn't know. I know some people are like, if you touch an animal, the baby's mother will never take it back. And that's a
that's
mythology. That's
correct.
not true at all.
Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah. And so I found a little baby and I was able to kiss it. And I'm actually wearing a deerskin backpack there
That makes
too.
sense.
And so
Yeah,
I got
that's
to
cool.
kiss and hold that little baby. And then I put her down and she walked right back to her mom and they went off together. So she was fine. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want people to think that like I ruined this baby's life.
Yeah. It's the dumbest, like, how do you think maternal instinct works? It's the stupidest thing. Uh,
Totally. The
like a
strongest
mother.
instinct in the universe.
Yeah, exactly. We so we have ducks as well, and everything down here eats ducklings, and I mean everything. We have
Oh,
eagles, we have hawks, we have quolls, we have ravens will eat ducklings. Like, so
whoa.
they're the snack that everyone wants, which means whenever this well, it's finished now, but for the last few months, whenever we see one of our ducks with a trail of little yellow puffballs after her, it's like, oh god, now we have to like chase and catch them because they have to be raised. And it's it's that's that custodian thing, right? They whine they cry and cry and cry, and I'm like, literally, you will die if I put you back, and it's my job to keep you alive. But an animal like if a duck could kick down a door, she would. Like, she
Yeah.
tries for days to get back at the
Oh,
ducklings, and I'm like, I'm doing this for you too. You can have them back when they're teenagers, because if we if we both, well, you don't know, we leave them out there, they get killed, right? So yeah, the
yeah.
idea that if you touch, yeah, it's the dumbest. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
I saw this one. I thought this is really fun. Like, did you guys make these kayaks?
Yeah. Yeah, those are traditional Greenland style. They're called skin-on kayaks. Those aren't actually animal skins. That's
Okay.
ballistic nylon painted with a two-part polyurethane, but that's the traditional way of making a Greenland style kayak. So yeah, we made those. There's no metal in the whole boat except for right around the collar. There's a couple little tiny nails. The rest it's all just lashed together with sinew. Um yeah, and that's actually a photo of us. We went hunting one year. We kayaked in on this frozen fucking river, and kayaked in. I capsized in the frozen river, whatever, ruined the hunting trip. But that was our big plan: was to go hunting, get a deer, and load it up and go back. Didn't quite go that way, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
eventually I'd like to learn how to make those boats with uh,
Yeah,
moose
yeah,
skin would be the closest thing I could approximate. You know, a lot of times they'd be seal skin, which I don't have access to.
yeah, cool. And this, I mentioned at the beginning, I believe this is this the tent? Is this the structure that you built and lived in?
Yeah, that's my current house. So
Oh,
I
okay,
had a
cool.
tent.
Right.
Yeah, I had a tent before that I built more of the structure of, and then it died because 5 years in the weather and it was dry rotted and all that. And now this is my current structure that I live in, which I did. I still, I built that whole porch system and the outer frame system and everything. And so that's completely off grid. That's in a little aspen grove, and yeah, I should say I don't have any solar panels or anything either, because I think sometimes when I say off grid, people just assume I have the same
Solar panels and a
amenities.
diesel
It's just
generator.
solar.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, I don't have anything.
yeah.
I have a tiny little battery pack that I can charge a phone on, and I plug that into my truck to get electricity when I need it. But the rest, it's all wood burning stove and propane oven or stove cooktop, and yeah, and haul all my own water in. I got a little preschool wagon I drag around with all my stuff that I need, all my water jugs. And well, now it's a sled because there's 4 feet of snowpack on the ground. But
I think I
yeah,
have
that's my home.
that picture. This is the same place?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was just not that long ago. There's even more snow now. It's been biblical
Mm.
proportions. If and I have a little trail that goes out, and then I live on a 100-acre ranch. And so the trail goes out, and if you're on the trail, it only looks about, 6 inches deep or something. But if you accidentally slide off the trail at all, you're mid thigh to waist deep in snow. The snowpack it's pretty serious around here. So which, I mean, people, often say, like, how do you live like that? And my house is cozy. It's super warm. I have a wood stove. It's usually 75 degrees inside my house. And I don't know. I guess I've gotten used to being uncomfortable.
There's a couple
Hmm?
of questions. The first one, this is obviously a summit image. So do you have like roll down sides so that you can have them up for airflow and then down for the winter? Is that the general idea?
Potentially I could do that. I didn't do it this year because it's
So
just so hot
out
anyways.
in the snow, there's still no walls, but it's warm on the inside anyway.
There's walls. No, there are walls.
Okay,
So this,
cool. All right.
what you're looking at is the porch. And then,
Of
so
course. Yeah, yeah,
back
yeah. Cool.
behind
Yeah,
me, yeah,
yeah.
back behind me is the tent. And then it's a 15 by 18
Okay,
house.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. So the next
Mm-hmm.
question, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, because this is what everyone who lives off grid gets asked, is tell me the bathroom setup.
Ah, yes. Well, I compost my poop. And
Mhm.
so I have a bucket system with a toilet lid on it. And I put dirt and whatever sawdust, coffee chaff or whatever on it. And it doesn't smell. It smells way less than a regular bathroom does, honestly. And then I got a compost pile where I just pile it all up and it doesn't stink. It's like covered with chaff and sawdust and everything, and then it turns to soil. And in a
Yeah.
few years, then we put it on the fruit trees, and the fruit trees love it. Yeah,
Yeah, no, very good. Well, this I have a
yeah,
bunch of friends down here. Well, three friends down here with composting toilets. So like, there,
mhm,
it's a good system. It's really cool. And I think that was
yeah,
the end of the little slideshow. But that's just for people.
nice,
Again, we made sure we spoke about the slides for people listening to this rather than watching it. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, this has been. I was super looking forward to this conversation, and we covered a lot of ground, and I knew that was
yeah,
going to happen, right? Because it's
yeah,
uh, this is such a primal's the wrong word. Uh, Such a movingly human thing, and because it is so, it has these kind of like wider cosmic implications. And yeah,
totally.
I'm super happy about it, and I'm sure the people listening and watching are fascinated. But tell them what you've got going on, where they could, if there are workshops and all that kind of stuff that they can follow up with and find you at and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, cool. So we have a newly budding magical school here on the ranch that's only in person. We don't really have any the setup to do any online stuff. So we have where our school is called Gathering Ways, and that website is just gatheringways.com. And so there we'll have listed the different courses and offerings that we have coming up, which I put a lot on the calendar this year because I'm feeling like I'm being called into that like the movement of life again from kind of meditating as a monk. So
Yeah.
we have slaughter classes. I'm doing a 5-day wild roots tending course in the springtime.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
look
we'll
at
do
that.
brain tanning.
Roots Wild Food Camp. And yeah, that's
What?
really, so I've
Mhm.
got it up on got the website up for people to look at. Small animal slaughter.
Beautiful.
See, that
Yeah.
one's always popular. That,
Yeah.
yeah, I need to do one of them.
Yeah.
Don't think you can use YouTube to slaughter a chicken.
Please
Please go.
don't. Please don't. Or tan hides. Don't look at
Yeah,
YouTube to
yeah, yeah.
tan hides either. It's horrible. Yeah, so the honorable harvest is our slaughter classes. And we have a couple different varieties, from like killing the animal and then furthering the process, using every part, depending on what your schedule looks like. Some are 3 days, some are 4 days. And we'll have some more. I don't think we put up the women's hunting camp yet, but we'll have some more on there. And then, I also organized the Buffalo Bridge Project, which we didn't talk that much about.
Oh, well, let's
And the
do some now
Buffalo,
because I think that's super cool. Like I've got that
okay,
up on the thing. I think this is
cool.
fascinating. I've got all the time as
Yeah.
you do. Let's, Buffalo
Okay. Yeah,
Bridge.
I'm down. Cool.
Yeah.
So Buffalo Bridge, it's it's one of those nebulous, hard to be concise about. So basically, how this project started was my friend Katie went to Yellowstone 11 years ago, and she's the one who taught me how to brain tan hides. And so she was wearing all her buckskins, and she was going on vacation, and she happened to see some trucks lined up on the road and some hunters out on the road around gut piles. And so she got out of the car and she went up to him and she was like, "Hey, I just want to know what's going on. I just love guts. And, what are you guys doing?" And they were all tribal hunters. And one of the tribal guys saw her buckskins and was like, "Hey, where'd you get those buckskins?" And she's like, "Oh, I made them." And he's like, "Come to my buffalo." And so she walks over to his buffalo and they strike up this relationship. And he says, "We really need people out here. We need help out here. Killing buffalo is a lot of work." And she said, "All right." And so she put out a call that year that she wanted to set up a camp during the tribal buffalo hunt, a month-long camp of people who just wanted to help tribal hunters. That's the whole brainchild. Is, a lot of times a buffalo hunt would have been an entire clan's like a, what am I trying to say, like a collaboration, with
Right.
all the women and children and all the guy. It would be, everybody would be out there. But now, since people were forced under reservations, and a lot of the tribes that hunt in Yellowstone don't even live near Yellowstone anymore. Some of these tribes are, 9 hours, 12 hours away. So unfortunately, now what the tribal hunt looks like is, maybe they can take off a weekend, so they drive over on the weekend, and you get four guys who are hunting for grandma, grandpa, this ceremony, this funeral, this wedding, like all the aunties, uncles. And so they just asked for help. So the next year, we actually got a little grant from a foundation called Primitive Found to buy the wall tents and the wood stoves and some of our gear. And we set up, and it was a blast. We camped right across the road from where the buffalo are hunted, and we just made friends with some of the tribal guys, the tribal conservation officers. And at first they were kind of like, why are you guys doing this? And all of us were like, honestly, for us to even be able to touch a buffalo, like, that in itself
Mhm.
is beyond anything I could ever imagine. And then once we're elbows deep, covered in blood, like all day in the snow with them and blizzards hauling meat, then they're like, all right, okay, like, these white girls are pretty cool. And so it really took off from there. And so this would be our 10th year. Gosh, it's been a decade, I think.
Wow.
Almost, maybe 9 years, 2014. So 9 or 8, 9 years. And so I mean, it's just been incredible. So, where a lot of us are ancestral skills practitioners. So our camp can run anywhere from 8 people to, we had 30 people last year. And part of it is we do have a student component. So if people want to come, then they pay a tuition and they come for a month-long immersion. But a lot of us are already kind of practiced hide tanners, flint knappers, at butchers, whatever, animal skills people, and really obsessed with using every part. And so, yeah, the tribes have been really stoked just to have extra hands and extra help. And then often what happens is they give us hides and heads and bones, different meat, sometimes meat, a lot of times not, but that's fine. Like the carcasses, whatever, they give us gifts. And that's kind of the bulk of what Buffalo Bridge does. Then we're like nerding out about tanning hides, and, oh, I read in this book that we could do this with the bladder, well, let's try that with these 50 bladders now. And so, like, piecing together, like scouring archival records of journals of the first settlers, and that said that this tribe used to do this with this part. Okay, well, what if we did this? Because right now, a lot of this stuff is kind of, it's it's not completely, but it was intentionally destroyed, like the hide tanning. It was intentionally destroyed, and now it's in these anthropological journals or on a museum wall. And so what I'm really interested in is like, well, how can we keep this going? How can we breathe life back into this? Okay, it's one thing to say people used stomachs for water bag containers. Okay, so I try to use a stomach for a water bag container, but then wherever the water isn't, dried out and it cracked and exploded. So I'm like, okay, well, then we're missing a piece here. So, right, you're like
Mhm.
in a living culture, when these things are alive and you have the relationship with them, it's so different than something written down in a book, or, this tool on the wall of a museum being said that it was a war club, but actually come to find out it's a tanning tool. And so piecing together whatever we can. And since I have this skill as a butcher, actually, feeling like I can actually be of service, in whatever ways, little material ways that I have. And the tribes have really enjoyed it. And I only get, I guess it's important too, right? With the whole, like, I think that I've stayed away from the internet world so much because the whole kind of culture around cultural appropriation and attacking each other and like canceling and stuff. I don't actually understand it because I don't have any of it, social media or anything. But I just want to say that, like, I've never been, in all our years doing it, and I've never had any tribal person ever
Yeah.
communicate any form of anything but like super stoked to hang out and to explore. They come to our camp, and like once a lot of the tribes realized we know how to brain tan, we were invited back to reservations to teach brain tanning. And so
That's
that the
cool.
following year we went and taught brain tanning on the Nimi reservation. And it was one of the first times in 200 years that brain tanning was like brought back. And now that family knows how to brain tan hides, and they have taught so many of their families how to tan hides. And so now there's this big brain tanning camp on the reservation. And it's not, this also isn't some white savior shit, it's,
Yeah, of course
I
not. Yeah.
recognize I'm a beneficiary of cultural genocide. And I am like, whatever I can like take from empire and transform and then continue on in the path. I mean, I feel, that's why I truly, I don't know, I'm getting tongue tied because I don't,
No, I get it. Look, the people who would say stuff like that haven't, you can tell they haven't spent time in Indigenous context. It's not like you're
yeah,
wearing a feathered headdress to the Sonar Festival, right? Like, for God's sake.
totally,
Like, because, I
totally.
mean, just recently in Peru, I even had occasion to ask. So, a despacho ceremony, which is the kind of usually burial, sometimes fire offerings for Pachamama in the mountains, or the Apus, but it's like a burial of offerings. I'm like, because I got trained on how to do that by someone who was allowed to do so. But I'm like, is this something people can do? And it's like, anyone can, and we should be doing. Like, please, please take
Yeah,
this. And this idea that they're squeamish about it. Now, I'm not going to declare myself a Paco, like a fucking Andean shaman or any of that kind of stuff.
totally,
But they're like,
totally.
listen, this is coming back, the world needs these skills to come back, and that's a much
Yeah,
more hyper pragmatic indigenous idea, right? It's like,
yeah,
let's do this. It's from the outside, it's like, well, what do you want them to do? Just like not be able to bring the buffalo components, for an annoying word, back to their own like, it's just, yeah, I don't even think
yeah,
about it. I actually think most of that's going away. Whenever someone like
good.
raises their hand and says something dumb like that, it's like, just ah, try and, yeah, back to Twitter with you, for God's sake.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciated on one of your podcasts, Gordon, you had said something like you can learn from a culture without being extractive. And
Yeah,
that I loved it. And you actually have been pretty instrumental in my ability to think about how I would retort to some of those people,
yeah,
because I
cool.
think you're able to articulate that really beautifully. And that's what I found is that, so for okay, just to lay the historical groundwork for this hunt, the tribal buffalo hunt has only been allowed to happen since 1996, I think. So 1870s, the tribes were forced onto reservations. Many of them had treaties to continue hunting buffalo, quote, as long as the grass is green. That was in the language of it. And of course, they weren't allowed to hunt buffalo.
Yeah,
And because there were only 23 of them left in 1902, and then they were protected, and then the populations kept getting bigger. And then in the 80s, the state of Montana and Yellowstone National Park and some other agencies started slaughtering the bison because they were migrating out of Yellowstone, and most of the land around Yellowstone is owned by cattle ranchers. And so they were slaughtering bison by the hundreds and letting them rot. And there were a couple of watchdog groups that filmed this with the old school video cameras and like sent the VHSs to wherever. And they kind of made a huge stink about it. People started realizing that they're gunning down these buffalo by helicopter and horseback and ATVs. And the tribes got wind of it, and the tribe said, "Whoa, we have treaties from the 1800s to hunt these bison. And why are you gunning them down by the hundreds?" See, people think that the buffalo genocide, the buffalo like big slaughter happened 100 years ago. You see the guy standing on the pile of skulls, and
yeah,
people think, oh, that was a shitty part of American history, but it was happening in the 80s, and it
exactly.
actually, yeah, and it's still happening. And so every year they have a cull program. They say Yellowstone National Park can only hold 2,500. That number is getting reworked a little bit. But, so I don't know what the current numbers are, but I think last year there were 5,000 bison. And so their cull number every year is 1,000, usually around 900 to
Yeah,
1,000 buffalo they want to kill. And so the tribes came forward in the 90s. our good friend Lee White Plume from the Nimi, he was one of the guys on the front lines, and they advocated and advocated, got told no over and over, and kept trying, and then finally were able to hunt. And of course, in the beginning, there was a lot of racism, and the tribes weren't actually allowed to shoot their own buffalo. Only the park rangers were. And so it was like racist white park rangers shooting them up and basically being like, go get your meat, boys. But then they couldn't use the meat for ceremony and different, it was like, it was spoiled because it wasn't done in the right way. And so they kept fighting. And the Nimi were the first to be allowed to hunt. I think it was in 1996, according to Lee, and I don't know what the official like numbers on a website would be, but so every year a new treaty tribe has come forward and said, "Oh, we also have a treaty because they have historical use of the Yellowstone area, and we want to hunt here too." And they fight in the courts, and so every year, there's almost every year since I've been out there, there's been a new tribe. So, for instance, last year it was the Arapaho Nation's first year being allowed to hunt. The year before that, I think it was the Blackfoot. Year before that, the Yakima. So there's these new tribes. So these guys, in living memory, have never hunted buffalo before, and they're
No.
coming out. And and so for us being on the ground for almost a decade now, they will come to camp. And like last year, the Arapaho guys came in, and they said, "We're the first Arapaho hunters in 200 years."
That's
And it
cool.
just like,
Mm,
wow. And
yeah.
they're like, we would like help because we actually never hunted buffalo before.
Yeah.
And so being able to like just be there on the ground, seeing that old ancient relationship between those tribes, those buffalo people and the buffalo people, coming back together in a couple hundred years. I mean, it has been
It's huge.
incredible.
Yeah. National parks, I tell you, they're good in theory. This is so. Bill Nagee was a Gagaju elder in Northern Territory, and so he grew up in what is now like in the 20s, 30s, in what is now Kakadu National Park in Australia, and the changes because saltwater crocodiles are protected, which means there's now too many of them, which means they have to be culled, and but not just that, because he said growing up, there are places we were able to swim and fish before, which we can't now because we'll get eaten by crocodiles if we do it. But they weren't there before because that like
Oh,
and it's the same situation of they Kakadu National Park's done okay over not really, but there are like indigenous ranger programs so that the native burning and whatever is done by like the actual local custodians, but it's
yeah.
still this sort of process of yeah. Oh, we have to protect the saltwater crocodile. Now there's too many of them, but you still can't kill them. we,
Yeah.
we have to do that. And even then, like it takes away the areas where they could fish or swim. And I think it's these you kind of understand it's a, not necessarily good in theory. The heart thinking behind a national park is right, but it comes out
Mm,
of a model of nature that is wrong, a model that
yeah.
actually includes nature. So
Yeah.
yeah, but that's really exciting. You know what? There's something that sort of Arthurian idea of sacred kingship and the idea that the cosmos is running correctly if a king is on a hunt, right? And it's always archetypal. It's
Mm,
never meant to be literally. Um, I feel given the devastation that happens to indigenous cultures, right? I actually do feel better knowing that like Australia is facilitating the return of like indigenous fire wardens and like indigenous hunting practices so that these activities which are part of that obligation we've been talking about this whole episode are slowly coming back. And it's the
yeah.
same thing, like it's wonderful to know that like uh, Total Island First Nations are doing the same thing. Like there's like an indigenous buffalo hunt again. That's
Yeah.
amazing. You know.
It's
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, and, like, I feel so honored and so blessed to be, like, just being able to witness it. A couple years ago, there was not a lot of hunting during Buffalo Bridge. There wasn't a lot of hunting, and then all of a sudden the buffalo came in full force, like several hundred moving on the landscape at once. And there was a hunt that day. And so we went out and we were helping some of our like old school tribal like Nimi Poo friends. And I'm gutting a buffalo, whatever. And this old timer walks up to me from another tribe this old timer. He says, "Hey, do you know why these buffalo came?" And I was like, "No, I don't know." I was gonna spout off some shit about, oh, when the snow comes and they can't find food, blah 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 blah, and I just shut my fucking mouth. And he's like, "It's because these young men here," and he like did the head nod. "These young men here who you see, they're all our medicine men in training. All these young, teenage boys." And we've been praying and sweating for 10 days, and we called him, and then we arrived, and he was a Blackfoot guy, and I was like, "Oh!" And then he just walked away, right? And I'm like, "Oh,
Nice.
wow, this is amazing!" And I'm in the guts, and a little while later, one of these young men, maybe 18 years old, comes up to me, and this was their first time being allowed to hunt since tribal, the reservation. And so he walks up to me and says, "Excuse me, ma'am." It's always weird when people call me ma'am still. "Excuse me, ma'am. Um, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "Well, do you know where the gallbladder is?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I do." He said, "Well, we're looking for one. We're missing one. We need one gallbladder. We just don't know where it is." And so I was already in a gut pile, and so I was like, "Well, it's on the liver," and flip the liver over, and it's attached here. It's this bag full of green liquid, and I cut it out, and I handed it to him. He's like, "Thanks. We have this ceremony that we were handed down over time, but we haven't been able to do it because we haven't been had access to buffalo, and this was the last piece that we needed for the ceremony."
That's cool.
Walked back, right? And so it's like that, and I think that's beautiful too, the bridging of cultures too, like whatever I can offer material skills that I have, and just from being a butcher, I know where a gallbladder is, and we can like piece it back together to, you know what I mean? Like we can work together to piece back something really fucking important. And who knows what ceremony that was and what they did, and that's not mine to know.
That's cool.
But I was able to at least like offer a little piece.
It's amazing. That's a
Yeah.
really good spot to end on because that's like you participated in bringing back a ceremony that was gone for like what? Yeah, at least a century. That's amazing. That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Harmony, this has been a fantastic chat. We definitely went over time, but there was, too much to too much to get through. And for people listening, of course, gatheringways.com is where you can find out more about the upcoming projects and all the rest of it. We have a lot of listeners in the Northwest, in like Washington and Oregon and so on. So hopefully you will get to meet them. But it was lovely meeting you. It's been a
Thanks,
great
Jordan.
great discussion.
Yeah. Thank you so much.